my time now?
Yes.
Your turn. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Freeda.
I'm so glad all of you came. It's so good to see all of you. And it's so good that you came to help me celebrate my 90th birthday. It's just wonderful to be 90. You have no idea what you can get away with when you get to be 90. I know, I've tried a few things. But anyway, Lordy, Lordy, here I am 90 and still feisty and naughty. but anyway, first of all, though, now, I want to thank God for every year He's given me and for the good life I've had all through these years. I've had just a wonderful life. And now, some of you have heard some of what I'm going to say, but some of you haven't. So if you that have, just be patient while I tell you that haven't. I promise you that have, I'll tell you something you've never heard of before. Oh my gosh, I have no idea what I've just said. Anyway, I tried to grow old gracefully, but I think I overdid it. I'm afraid that my all-night Saturday night dancing is over. I'm afraid I just won't be doing that anymore. And I know all of you will miss that. I will. But anyway, once in a great while now, I still go out and try to paint the town red, but I have to rest up a long time before I can put the second coat on. But when you get to be 90, first thing people think of, and a lot of questions are asked, how did you get to be 90? What was your health like in all those years? You know, everybody, and that's the first thing you think of. You've lived to be 90, how's your health? And one of the questions they'd always ask was, have you ever been bedridden? And I said, oh yes, several times, and once in the back seat of a car. And you know, all of you have seen older people being interviewed on TV, and they would always ask them, what do you contribute to your long life? And they would always say, good, clean living. Well, I've lived a good, clean life, but I've had an awful lot of fun along the way. In fact, I didn't even know I was getting old until I reached down to pull the wrinkles out of my hose and found I didn't even have any holes on. But anyway, oh, and by the way, I need to tell this little story. I'm from Arkansas, as all of you know by now. I learned to wear shoes at a very early age, so. But went back home, and we went to the church, an old hometown, and the church I grew up in. And we were all gathered in, and the preacher got up to preach his sermon and realized he had left his sermon notes at home. And he says, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll just have a singing service. So that suited us all fine, you know. And he held up a cardboard with the word rock written on it, and we all sang Rock of Ages. Then he held up the next cardboard with a picture of a bird on it, and we all sang I'll Fly Away. And then his last card he held up was a word written on it, the name sex. And everybody got so still and quiet, you know, and they didn't know what to do, and I sat there and I stood as long as I could, and I jumped up and started singing Precious Memories. And anyway, I went to the doctor. Lyle took me to the doctor several years ago for a regular checkup, you know. And he waited out in the lobby for me. And I went in, and the doctor checked me over, and he says, well, Freeda, I just don't find a thing wrong with you. You just seem to be doing fine. He says, tell me, do you and your husband still have sex? And I said, well, just a minute, doctor, let me go ask him. And he's sitting out in the lobby, and I says, honey, do we still have sex? He says, darling, if I've told you once, I've told you 100 times, we have AARP. And of course, everybody knows that Lyle's always kept me in a good car ever since we've been married. I have to give him that credit. But I went out one day and was coming back in, and I couldn't slow down. My brakes failed, and I was trying to turn into the carport, and I couldn't slow down. I run through the hedge and run through my mouth's getting dry. I run through the hedge and over the garbage cans and rammed into the garage door.
I was gonna say, see, that's luck, not the wood.
And rammed into the garage door, and Lyle heard all of that, and he come out to see what in the world was happening. And I said, I don't know, but I think my brakes failed. He says, well, let me examine them. And he got down to examining the brakes, and he says, my goodness, Freeda, you lost an awful lot of fluid. And I said, well, if you'd have been as scared as I was, you'd have. And as I said earlier, I had a good life of growing up. Sure, I had a few difficulties, but I worked through them, as everybody's had difficulties. Don't never say you didn't ever have any problems. But anyway, I had the most wonderful parents in the world, and there were 9 of we kids, 8 girls and 1 boy. Bless that little boy. But anyway, we certainly were not raised on caviar and champagne, but with lots of hard work and God's help, we had plenty, and lots of love in that big family. But anyway, one day Mama and the girls, some of the girls were in the kitchen fixing lunch, and always had to make sure there was plenty for everybody, you know. And one of the girls says, Mama, why did you have so many kids? And Mama says, well, just which one of you would you have wanted me to leave off? She was a pretty little Irish lady with a very quick, good answer for everything. And that was my mother. But anyway, I'm getting lost here. I finally grew up and went away to school, college town up in North Arkansas, and that's where I met the love of my life, my husband, Lyle. And we were married and had 66 good years together. Actually, we had 68 good years. It took me 2 years to talk him into marrying me. But anyway, Lyle's been gone now for over 4 years, actually, but I still like to talk about him. And I always said my gift of gab and his dry wit was one of the things that kept us together. Communication is a good thing, too, between a couple. He would get up of a morning and he'd say, good morning, dear, and I'd take it from there and I'd communicate the rest of the day. He always said he never worried about me stepping out on him or cheating on him in any way, because that'd be the first thing I'd tell when I come in. But anyway, men, I've got to tell this about the men since there's some men here. They're the worst people in the world to go shopping for their wives, you know. And one day Lyle went to shop for me, and he says, I walked into the sales lady, and he says, I'd like to buy my wife a gift, and I believe she'd like a pair of those pants with those funny cuffs on them. And the sales lady says, bell bottoms, and he says, no, but she's getting that way. But one thing Lyle and I always did was share everything half and half, you know. And I had to go shopping one day, and I went to him for some money. I very seldom ever do that. He has to come to me for money. But anyway, he just handed me his billfold and says, now here, just take this and just spend your half of money. And I took it and went on shopping. Got back, I just handed him his billfold. And he looked in it, and he says, well, Freeda, you spent it all. I said, I had to. My half was on the bottom. And, of course, giving and taking means an awful lot. Lyle would give, and I'd take all I could give. And there's something else I need to tell all of you about him. This is partially true. He was as romantic, and you wouldn't think of him as a romantic man, but that man was as romantic as a bull moose. I could take him a cup of coffee and a piece of pie, and he'd say, oh, Freeda, you're the sweetest damned old woman. Now that's romance. I knew right the way that old man's feeling real romantic. And then one day we were, he wasn't a big drinker, but he liked to drink once in a while, especially if he's had a big day, hard day at work, you know. And so this day after 5, he come in and was having his drink, and I was having a Coke. I'm not a drinker, but I taste a little with him now and then. And we were having our drink and sitting there holding hands and talking about the good old days, you know. And he finished his and he got up. He says, Freeda, I'm going to have another drink. Would you like another one? And I noticed I had just about that much ice left in my glass. And I said, oh, just a very small one, Lyle. I don't want very much now. Just fix me a very small one. He took my glass and he come back with that glass full to the level, plumb full. I said, Lyle, I didn't want all of that. I only wanted my eyes covered. He says, well, hell, I couldn't cover that ice. It just kept coming to the top. And then I have a story. Since Jerry, my youngest son's not here, he couldn't get off from the job today and come in. But I've got a story to tell on him since Janet and Jimmy are here to defend themselves. But Jerry come in to me one day, now this is another true story, and says, Mother, you're a good mother. Said, you raised me right. You did a good job with me. But I can't figure out for the life of me how you went so bad on Jimmy and Janet. Now that I've just about finished my educational talk to all you good people, I have an announcement to make. Most of you know that Bob Hope is 93 and may even be older now. I think he's over 93. And I'm 90. And Bob and I have decided that we're going to retire from entertaining. We feel we're getting too old for it. And now that's it. I love all of you, and I thank you for listening to all of my foolishness.